Okay, welcome everyone to today's social system mapping on-ramp session for March 11th, 2024. As usual, it's your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, and Kara Martner. And for today's agenda, oh, here we have another new person showing up, and Kara's going to get them. So for today's agenda, we're going to do what we often do, which is first start with some chat intros into the telling where we're at, who we each are. And I'll do a brief introduction to social system mapping, what it is, and what is the tools needed to do it. I'm going to share today. So what we often like to do with this kind of a session with these the second Monday of each month is to have someone from our community of practice share a map that they've been working on. But this month I didn't find anybody to do that, and so we have to revert to the default, which is I share a map that one of the maps I've worked on over the years that is publicly shareable. And so today I thought I would share the transformation systems mapping and analysis working group map because it has the dual elements feature. And I was anticipating a couple people showing up who I think would appreciate seeing the dual elements, and I don't think have. So that's the plan. So that's the map I'm going to share. Then we'll stop for some questions and answers. And then if you want to stick around for an extra half hour after the session, we'll just open it up to informal discussion. But just forewarning, many of you have seen this map before. And so for those of you who it's new, I would say that we would be happy to just dig into your questions, especially. And given that it might be a slightly less formal session than usual. And so that means feel welcome to just really make sure that your questions and curiosity gets addressed. Okay, so for the chat intros, let's have you, and welcome Amy, if you want to do a quick mic check. I don't know, how's your voice doing?
My voice is better, almost normal. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and in the chat at our name, pronoun, location. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can see each other. And then when you're done with that, what's one primary network that you are part of or working with or thinking about doing mapping with potentially? Voter protection. Important. Neighborhood economics, also important. Open innovation. So that's one thing that it's just really appreciate all of the work in the world that everyone is doing, and social system mapping is meant to be a support for that, not an end in and of itself, but to really help support the change that people are working on, important systemic changes people are working on. And so really just want to give a shout out to all of you for all of that important work. And lastly, what brings you here today? Is there any special thing you're hoping to get out of this session that would be helpful for me to know? All right. So Um, thanks for all of you for showing up for all the various different reasons that you have. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and I'm going to go through our just what is social system mapping. And I know most of you've seen this, but just in case it's been a while, I'm going to just go ahead and go through it. So what is social system mapping? How come my keystrokes aren't working? So social system mapping is basically, it's a mashup of a social network analysis map, the social network map being the foundation of a social system map, and then everything, all of these other pieces get added on to that foundation of the social relationships. So it's a mashup of a network map, a social network map, an asset map, concept map, system map, stakeholder maps. There's just a lot of different maps that people are working with out there that can be included, content of it can be included in a social system map. And so it's a mashup of all of those, but it's different from all of those in that a social system map is all of them together. So it's far more dimensional. It's far more dynamic. It can be maintained over time. You can add new people to it over time. You can add new questions to the various data kinds of questions that we're asking for over time. And so it's a lot more complex. And so it doesn't, each of those other kind of maps you can kind of look at and wrap your head around it pretty quickly. A social system map is a little more cognitively challenging, but it also is a richer and more abundant picture of the complexity that a network represents. So it's online, interactive, accessible, it's iterative, emergent, dynamic, and it's an ongoing collective practice. So we like to say that social system mapping starts at the process of it starts when we decide to do a social system map. So it's not the end product of the map outcome that we're really focused on. It's how do we begin? How do we invite people in? How do we define the kind of things that we want to see in the map? Whose sort of reality gets to be present or isn't present? How do we make sure that that is reflective of what we want to understand and what we want to work with in the system change that we're trying to address? So it's the whole process from beginning to end is the mapping process that we do as collectively as we have the capacity for. And it's a learning process the whole way through. We're not waiting to the end to see what we get to learn. So I'm saying it's a process more than a product, and its purpose is to support systemic transformation. We are trying to support a global movement that you're all already obviously working on, that lots of people all over the globe are working on, shifting from systems of dominance and exploitation and extraction in myriad forms and all kinds of scales to systems of connection and reverence and regeneration. So that's the point of a social system map. One of the things we've learned in this shift about helping to generate this shift from systems of dominance to systems of connection is that there are a couple conditions that are really important in that shift for supporting systemic transformation. And one is strong networks. So networks being multi-sectoral, partial, different perspectives, because systems are complex and we need to represent as much of the system as we can in our networks. So we need strong networks. And we need those networks to include wise change agents, people who understand how change works in systems, especially in complex systems, people who understand how to think about how to make change happen. And so we like to say there are basically sort of two dimensions that we're trying to shift in our work. One is so these two fundamental shifts. One is the relational shift. So that's the sort of the network piece, the building relationships piece, and going from understanding ourselves as separate selves to interdependent and connected selves. So that's how we relate to ourselves and to the world. That's a significant, important shift in this moving from systems of dominance to systems of connection. And the other important shift is that wisdom part, the cognitive shift, the understanding, and going from understanding complex systems, going from having a mechanistic worldview where things are, like cogs in a machine, everyone's replaceable. We can plan things out far and ahead and predict, to a much more open, complex, dynamic, living or complex systems worldview. So we're working on both of those shifts, from a separate self to an interconnected self, and from a mechanistic mindset to a complex systems worldview. And social systems, I turned off the slide, but social system map, this is just a picture saying, social system mapping, again, is working on both of those shifts at the same time. So it is a rather dense and rather complex practice, but that doesn't mean it has to, we can start where we start. It doesn't mean there has to be a huge leap of faith into this big messiness. We can take it a step at a time. So the technology for social system mapping, there's two pieces to it. One is the sumApp, which is the tool that my partner and I built to gather data for this specific purpose. It's not a survey tool for, getting market feedback or all kinds of other uses of survey tools. It's really designed to get at relationships and attributes of the members in a network. And so we gather the data in sumApp, and this data is gathered directly from the people in the network. It might be that someone interviews the people in the network and inputs the data. So we do that where there's, technical challenges. But what we're generally not doing with a social system map is researching the data on, researching online and just sort of figuring out what's there and guessing about what relationships are there. We're actually going directly to the people and saying, who are you working with? What are your, what are you working on, et cetera. So this is a collectively sourced data set that is gathered in sumApp. It's usually the sumApp data set it's just open for input in an ongoing way, so people can update their data whenever they want. The data gets fed live into a Kumu map. Kumu is an online platform that is made to represent network data, so network graph data. So the data then gets visualized in Kumu, and then a Kumu embed gets put back into the sumApp interface so that network members don't have to they don't have to go into Kumu to see the map. They can just see it right in their sumApp interface. So they're able to both interactively explore the data in sumApp, or explore the map in sumApp, and then they can also just toggle back and forth between different tabs to update their information if they see something they want to change. So that's the technology. Oops. Okay. Having said all that, I'm going to stop sharing and just see if there are any clarifying questions that anybody has before I go to sharing a map. Everybody looks good. Okay. So, let's see. I thought I would share the transformation systems mapping and analysis working group map. And the reason for this is not so can you all see my screen?
Yes.
And Richard, if it's okay, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I am sensitive to not calling people out, and and so I don't, if you just want to tell me, just don't talk to me, that's fine. However you want to respond is fine.
I'm okay. Go ahead.
I'm trusting that.
You have my permission to call me out, as it were.
Okay. So We are, you may recognize many, I know you're in our social systems mapping, you're in our community practice map, because I remember your name from it. And, and the rest of us meet pretty much every week. So Amy and
Right.
me, Jim and Tom, I know all this stuff. And on some level, they're just being polite and putting up with me doing this again and again and again, or just connecting and wanting to especially meet new people who are interested in social system mapping. And so this, and I believe they've all seen this map before. And so what I'm really hoping for us to do this morning is to answer all your questions, and for people to get, without you feeling too spotlighted, just to get to hear your questions and get to know you a little bit, to the degree you're comfortable with that.
Um,
How does that sound?
that sounds fine. That sounds fine. Um, I don't, I wouldn't say that I have any particular question. My mind keeps coming back, or my thinking keeps coming back to social system mapping. And when I first saw the work that you were doing on sumApp and system mapping in general, which was a few years back,
Mhm.
I was reminded of my own experience. This is my 72nd year, having retired once from the Bell system after 25 years, and then again in 2019 from my local public library after about 15 years. Um, and now looking at what is the work that I want to do. Um, I do participate with a voter protection group affiliated with the Democratic Party, affiliated with Fair Fight, interested in um, pulling together resources associated with doing that kind of work here in my home county in particular. Um, I, when I reflect back on my experience, I grew up in Mississippi in the 60s, in Meridian, Mississippi. And my father was NAACP president there for almost 15 years, from early 62 or somewhere until about 15 years later. And so I come from a background of social activism, and I have to say, and I had a brother-in-law who was involved in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and friends who were involved in that as well. I was too young to be involved in that. But what I think about is the whole process of social change. And what I thought about even during that experience in the 60s is something along the lines of what you're describing in terms of social network analysis, social asset, and thinking about the resources that are available in a particular community, um, and having collaboration with others on fulfilling or pursuing projects that they wanted to pursue. And my particular interest at this point is, and I also have recently, well, I've been listening to Ella Josephine Baker's biography and looking at her experience in the in the 30s in New York with the new cooperative movement, with and how she was able to maneuver through NAACP, SCLC, SNCC, and others without being caught up in any particular ideology or whatever, but working with people and identifying what resources are available and working with people. Now, what and the reason I keep coming back and thinking about social system mapping and is it, when I'm involved with people in a voter protection environment, we have these conversations. Oh, wait a minute now. Who is Ellen? Is who is she? What is she doing? Um, um, so there's a core of people who are interacting with each other,
Mhm.
and and many of them that I'm interacting with now are my age or older. So a lot of them are uh, pencil and paper, um, or something along those lines.
Mhm.
And or if you get them involved with some technical, well, sharing a Google document and editing it or something like that, that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But that's also true when I went through library school online.
Mhm.
I think I finished that in 2010. Drexel University of all places, online. Uh, the online experience is well with at Drexel you had an issue of being in a classroom, having to respond to what the professor put out,
Mhm.
and in some kind of chat group or something like that. But you couldn't get people to sort of like share a um, Wikipedia wiki type interface and contribute in those kinds of things. So I'm thinking about all of this and saying, okay, how would this be useful? I think it certainly would be useful for me because actually, now that I think about it, in my career in the Bell system and in the library system, one of the things that one of the contributions that I would make is sort of like a social system map in my head,
Mhm.
and what are the resources that that AT&T, as an example, had that we could use on this particular project.
Mhm.
And so therefore I could, be that contributor who would know who to go to, what, who could contribute what and that kind of stuff. So I can see where there may be value in this for me, but having some kind of generative part of that where you have a process where people are generating this kind of information and or knowledge or relationships, as it were, um, and finding some usefulness in this. um, and so that's so this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, as a young boy growing up in Mississippi and looking at the world around me, and the resources that are available, people doing stuff, how do you um, share and how do you collaborate with each other? So that's something so, so systems thinking was something that I was pretty much into before college, in college, after college. Um, and that's kind of the way I approach the world. As a matter of fact, a lot of people assume that I was a very technical person. I would suggest that I'm not so technical as much as I am about mapping and architecture
Mhm.
and understanding how things should work, could work.
Mhm.
If you want to do something, if you have something that you want to do and you have this piece of software that you're supposed to do it with, um, um, my concern is what are you trying to do? And then sort of like thinking that the people who designed this had something in mind. Is there something that can approximate what you want to do here? But that's so I keep coming back to this, but I struggle with knowing the so the other thing that I'm doing is and again something that 15 years ago I talked to some of my cousins about doing a nonprofit to organize our family reunion, genealogy work, and all that kind of stuff. So that's another thing that I've done is taken a step toward creating the nonprofit and beginning. I do genealogy work as well, and again, that is a kind of. But what you have is family members who come to that environment and you share something with them where they can contribute and they don't they just don't or they don't know how to um so I find myself just generating the information, doing the trees, all of that kind of stuff, and there are some others who can become engaged. So part of what I struggle with is when I look at sumApp as an example, uh, how would I use that? What value would it create? Now, I understand that we're talking about process and relationships and those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Um, but again, I come back to we're in a group together and we're talking about something to do, and you say, wait a minute, doesn't she do something like that? Isn't she a potential resource on that? So part of it is um, building relationships, yes,
Mhm.
but part of it is understanding the network, as it were,
Yeah.
or how potential acts. So I'm going to stop there.
Okay. That was wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to propose that I'm having some thoughts coming up as Richard is talking that come from my experience with lots of clients. And so I'm going to propose that unless anyone feels uncomfortable with this, that we hold off on looking at the map. And I'm just going to sort of share some thoughts with Richard about ways you could potentially move the dial in what you're talking about. Does that work for everyone? Okay. I was guessing that would be the case since you see maps a lot, but and I have to take a moment to just. So what you're
I
talking.
think you and I have, talked about some of this before, and I'm just coming back around to it.
Yeah. And um and so when we talked about it before, I don't remember what
No,
where
that's fine. Let's go right ahead.
I wasn't thinking you were expecting me to, but I'm just
No,
gonna
no.
assume that I have learned some things since the last time we talked, or I have had some
Okay.
experiences that have been helpful. They're not like big, big dramatic things, but they're small things.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so first, what you're talking about is just a chronic tension for the whole mapping idea. Because if we're trying to be liberatory and we're trying to shift systems, but it's in a technical interface that not everybody can access, boom, right there, we have a problem. And that's true. And so part of what I keep struggling with and learning about sort of by accident, just by holding the question in my mind and by interacting in different contexts, has to do with how do we cross that bridge, or how do we bridge that divide, or whatever it is, the piece about people want to make change, and there's all these constraints related to it, such as time. People who are fairly technically savvy generally are also fairly busy and fairly
Mm-hmm.
demanded upon, and so they don't have a lot of bandwidth. And then there's you know, comfort with technology. And then there's the bigger issues even than that are understanding the value, or like seeing a value in understanding the system, understanding the assets, understanding what's there. I mean, it comes up
Mhm.
organically in conversation in this sort of small sideways way. And I think we're so used to that, you know, wait, wasn't Sally doing something around X? I think I
Mhm.
remember, and then the whole, you know, and then we spend 15 minutes of our precious hour
Yes,
trying to
yes,
clarify our fuzzy memories about whether or not it would be useful to reach out to Sally, and whether it, you know, and maybe it would, and maybe it wouldn't, but maybe she's moved on, you know, all the maybes, etc. So, so we have like a lived experience of needing this kind of information, but since there's no history of having it in an accessible way, we don't think about building it or about referring to it.
right,
And so, and to start from that place is just sort of too big a leap. Like, oh, there's a map, we could look at the map. Even when there is a map, even like in our community of practice, we have a fairly well updated, at least by the core social system map. And I forget to look at it. Like we're thinking, you know, how do we move this thing forward? And so even for us, so I'm just admitting there's still a lot of weaknesses in this. It's like we understand the need, and adopting it, there's just a lot of challenges. So, and I know, and you just said that, I'm just confirming,
no,
absolutely,
I got you.
all the time. And so there's a couple things that I think part of it has to do with how much influence you have and how much capacity you have to pull people together to explore together. And if you have that influence and just bandwidth to do that, my thoughts would be to start really, really simple, doing things like, have you come across like, and Jim or Mary, I'm guessing you would have a quick resource maybe of any of those approaches to doing network mapping that are just post-its in yarn or post-its in lines on a whiteboard, some kind of activity like that. I don't have one like a spelled out how-to of it, but finding something like that. And Jim, it looks like you're unmuting, so maybe you have something.
I'll just drop one in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. So something like that as a starting point, and then having some conversation about what's the value of this. What if we had this, you know, even more information about all these people, and could access it online anytime we wanted. Just beginning conversations around how would this be valuable? What would we do with it? How could it help us? Those curiosity building things I think could be a useful place to start. I'll pause at that and see if you have questions or thoughts about that before I go to a next idea. And if anyone wants.
Yeah, and what you're suggesting there is there may be some utility, as it were,
Mhm.
that start small with some kind of social network analysis. Did I understand that correctly?
Just
Or social network.
so what I'm proposing is I guess there's two pieces that this is the starting point for in my a potential starting point for in my mind, which is so often we'll just get a lot of people together and, you know, introduce them and close triangles. And that's a relational activity, but I'm also wanting to start to prime the pump in people's minds for thinking about networks. So it's that cognitive shift of, and so mapping, meaning just a very manual, this is not a thorough, it doesn't have to be robust, it's just an activity for helping people begin to think about the value of being able to see and map relationships. So
Mhm.
so I'm sort of, what I'm going to suggest is, okay, there's sort of like three categories momentum that we need to build. One is in our beginning to think systemically, beginning to think in terms of networks. In the simplest, it can be in the simplest ways, but beginning to see what kind of, so this is a question for you. When you say you've been a systems thinker, like what kind of, how do you characterize that in terms of like flows and containers or?
Flows, containers, relationships, um, and I think Jim had indicated that he had been with Pac Bell and doing systems analysis and so forth. And certainly, um, what prompted me to move my view upward is, you know, how you have all these network connections and there is a network behind it, and what are those things, what are those nodes on that network?
Yep.
So it's more in terms of that kind of
Yep.
network, but also in the background thinking about the experience of the civil rights activity and actions.
Yep.
And you know, because what happened is the in Mississippi during the 60s with the setup of the Freedom Summer and the voting rights activity and so forth, there was this um, Congress of Federated Organizations. We called it COFO, NAACP, SNCC. I don't think SCLC was actually in Mississippi at the time, but other organizations. So sort of like, what are the organizations? So when I think about this, you know, I'm thinking about here I have a particular set of objectives and goals. Let me sort of like get in a helicopter and look around and see what else is there,
Mhm.
see who else is there,
Yeah.
you know. So that kind of is
Yeah.
what I'm speaking about in terms of networking.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's for you, like finding simple, easy ways for you to talk about. So, and I think you have some, I mean, Ella Baker is a great network model. The Underground Railroad is a great model for the value,
Mhm.
importance, and the power of networks. And yeah, I think you already have those sort of metaphors or models in your mind.
Yes.
And
Let me share one thing. It's just a sort of like an aside,
Mhm.
because it keeps me bringing back. So I've been listening to Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton, and I find the history of that period of activity and Alexander Hamilton's role in that interesting, only in terms of the networking piece of it, you know, and how. So there's some. Well, anyway, that's an aside, but that's what prompted me, I think, to begin thinking more about. Not it didn't prompt me. What prompted me to look at that was to understand something about that period in our history and how did it really happen? What is it? What were the elements of it?
Mhm.
And part of that is relationships
Yep.
and building coalitions, as it were. But let me go back to what your point is, Christine, and that is, um, you know, at this juncture, uh, what my particular focus is voter protection in my county and increasing the participation of young people in voting.
Mhm.
So this is what, the third month. So we November, and so my particular interest is this, you know, at this juncture, and so and what I'm trying to figure out is, what can I learn? How can I share? What can I do to move, to inform and to contribute to the work that we're doing in Gwinnett County, which could make a real difference in the election in November, as it were. And the reality is that, so we've got the voter protection group, we've got Fair Fight, we've got Young Democrats, we've got NAACP, we've got all of these organizations which have some kind of common share some kind of values and view associated with social change. So how do we and again, I don't have an official role, and in my career I've never really liked that. I don't want that. But I do have a voice. Ella Baker said that I am a woman who speaks in a voice and I must be heard. I don't bow to any man's word. But essentially, I'm not looking for a position. I'm
Yeah.
not looking for that kind of authority that
Yeah.
comes only from position. I'm looking for something that comes from building relationships and doing those kinds of things. And yes, I need to have some map, as it were, of looking at the resources that are available. And again, I'm looking at Gwinnett County in particular, because Gwinnett County in particular could make a difference in the next 9 months or whatever, or 7 months or whatever it is. So
Okay. So,
did I miss?
well,
I mean,
no, this was helpful. And I think what I'm, what's coming up for me is there's ways that in the long-term social system mapping could be helpful. And in the immediate term, the challenges are big enough and to social system mapping. I mean, the challenges in what you're talking about are the important challenges,
right,
not the challenges in social system mapping.
right.
And I have ideas for how to move the needle on adopting social system mapping so that in the long term it could amplify and increase the effectiveness of the networking you want to do.
Mhm.
In the near term, it feels to me like the urgency around the election is is like the social system mapping. There's a like, are you familiar with Theory U?
Yes, but I haven't seen that in 20 or 30 years yet.
Yeah. Well,
Hearing you, uh-huh.
there's a saying that comes out of Theory. I don't know where it came from, but when I used to hang out with Theory U people, we would say all the time, slow down to speed up. And
Yes.
so
Well, and that's the point. So it's because I'm not going out every day. I'm
yeah,
72 years old.
yeah,
So I'm not going out every day to a job.
yeah,
Um, and the things that occupy my time right now are my nonprofit family history organization. We're actually planning a reunion in Mississippi. By the way, we're planning it, and I'm not inviting you to the reunion, but anyway, we're planning a family reunion in Mississippi, Macomb, Mississippi, in August. And I have reached out to Array Films, the producer of Origin, where I want to do a showing of that movie in Macomb, Mississippi. Now, Macomb, Mississippi just happens to be where the principal actor, Ingenue Alice Taylor, grew up in Macomb, Mississippi. So I'm making that pitch to, but anyway, I haven't gotten that organized yet. So the point about this is, okay, slow down to
Well,
whatever. You know, I mean, it's the reality is that the winds of change are fast moving, but I'm sort of like somehow in this hurricane stabilized, but sort of like moving along with it some way. And I've just got to figure out what's the best contribution I can make.
yeah. Well, can I just, so what I'd like to do is just share with you sort of, I'm seeing sort of, there's three sort of strands of potential movement that I'm thinking about for your context. And I'd like to, can I just sort of summarize them and share thoughts about each? So the first one is some kind of, and I'm going to say this totally clear, that this is about slowing down to speed up, or about how to create the seeds that could become a social system map. And they may or may not be relevant to what you need to be doing at this time. It might be social system mapping is on the back burner for another few years, or it might be that this is a slow start to social system mapping that isn't aiming at the urgency of the near term, but is just sort of trickling into something new that's a longer term, potentially longer term thing. So I don't have whatever it is, I would need to feel like I could address broader things than this piece of the puzzle. So one, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. And just acknowledging that this is just one small piece potentially, and it might be totally useless to you. But the first one is just the shift of helping people start to think about the value of having more access to more information about the relationships in the network. So that manual, hand-drawn sort of network mapping thing is a way of sensitizing people to the value of that. That's one way. There could be other ways. So that's that imaginative shift that people, I'm discovering that a social system map is relatively useless if people aren't beginning to imagine another way things could work, and how we could be more reciprocal and move what we have into what we need to do. So there's that sort of general conceptual shift. The other piece is the technology piece. And I'm going to tell you a little brief story. I was working with a client, and we were going to do some preliminary work to figure out what should be in their social system map survey. What kind of things does the network want to know about each other? And we had a small design team, and there was and we were going to use a Miro board to make Post-its, to brainstorm what would we want to see. So this is very standard procedure. And my client said, one of the guys in this, she said, oh, so-and-so, an older man, Max, we'll call him Max. Max is not going to do this. He's going to object, and he's going to object vociferously. He hates this stuff. And I was like, that's cool. We'll just say right up front, say, Max, you don't have to do this. We will do it for you. You just tell us what to put. You don't even have to look at the board, but you can, etc. Right? So the first time we met, Max was very sort of curmudgeonly about the whole thing, and he gave us information. But he was clear he didn't like using a Miro board. The second time, a woman who, this was her first time in our session with us, wanted to use the Miro board. Are you familiar with the Miro board? It's just, it's an online whiteboard. It's an online collaborative whiteboard. It's not hard, but if you're not comfortable with technology, it's just it's along the lines of a Google Doc.
And you are talking about Miro as in the reflective. Is that what you're saying?
It's called MIRO. And it's an online.
I think I have heard of that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm guessing you probably have seen something somewhere. But so we're gathered again, and one of the women in the group isn't comfortable with Miro, but she's like, how do I do this? I want to do this, and she's struggling, and I'm like, okay, let's share. Okay, can you share your screen in Zoom? So she shares her screen, and we just very, very gradually, very slowly walk her through how to do it. Like, no, do you see that thing? No, move your cursor up a little. It's very time consuming and tedious, right? But we want her to be comfortable, and this is I see this as a relationship building opportunity. If someone is uncomfortable with your tool and you are patient with them and go at their speed, they trust you more, right? They go, oh, it's okay for me to, ask a dumb question, or I feel a little safer here. So we went through that exercise with this woman. And so she does it. And finally she's like, okay, great, I got it. And she's doing it. And while she was doing that, Max was copying her on his own screen and nobody knew it. He was hiding it. I mean, he was just doing it himself, right? But then by the time it was done, he was doing it. And by the time at the end of the session, he's like, I got it. I learned how to do Miro. And he was totally thrilled. And then from then on, he was like jumping into Miro every chance he got. And so I like to think of this technology challenge, like if people aren't comfortable with technology, whatever the tool is, there's going to be somebody who doesn't like it. There's going to be someone who resists it. And the first thing is to just make it not mandatory. And then if someone is willing to actually learn it in front of everybody else, that is both a relationship building opportunity, a trust building opportunity, like an opportunity to help people not feel uncomfortable, not knowing everything. And other people, when they watch someone learning, they learn it better than if, little Miss Expert Christine whips through it and scares them all to death with it. And so I just see that technology challenge. I like to just use that as an opportunity to build the relationships better and to learn together. And so there's the cognitive piece, there's the relational piece, and then out of those, there's a question of it was the third item when I first thought of this, and the third item is getting a little fuzzier in my mind. So, but
you talked about the first item as a shift to relationships, but in summarizing, you said something about cognitive.
Well, yeah. So I'm saying like that mapping piece, the mapping piece is not so much, it's about visualizing the relationships so that we start to think differently about relationships. Like we talk about relationships all the time, but we can't actually see them, right? I mean, you can see two people, gossiping together in the corner. You can see two people, planning whatever it is they're planning, but you can't, other than those little bits of evidence, you can't actually see the relationships in the room, and you can't see who does and doesn't know each other, or the relationships in the network. So that visualizing piece is a level of cognitive shift. And so I'm saying the visualizing piece, so I guess there's in my mind, there's two cognitive, oh my God, they're all overlapping. But the cognitive shift towards networks, and then using the software challenges as a relationship building opportunity. And then all of that, when you put them together, being a place to start thinking about how systems change. And which is related to the value of social system mapping. In summary, I'm I had stuff, I lost it. It sort of came back. But I think partly what I'm trying to say is, if there's a way to start planting seeds around social system mapping, even if it never turns into a social system map, you can be like, if you're holding it as not like we're getting started on a social system mapping project, but like we are starting to think together about how we can support each other more, how we can be more of a functional network, something that frames it a little more broadly, but begins to use some of the underlying potential of a social system map, just like knowing more about people. Even if it never turns into a social system map, you'll have started to prime the pump for deeper thinking and more sort of systemic awareness. And so what I'm saying is, like, just use the whole lead in to maybe doing a map as a relationship building and system shifting, cognitive shifting opportunity in and of itself. And then that might take off and build, and you might see that there's people with energy who want to help design a map and, you know, help get other people to share their data in the map and learn how to use it. And it might be that you build some network, some energy, and it goes in a totally different direction. And nonetheless, that's great, as long as it's moving it towards your purpose.
That's helpful. This whole, I mean, I guess I don't have a chance to really talk about some of this. So you're having me talk about the things that I'm thinking through is useful. And I guess that's one reason I came back to, to kind of visit this group. So that's helpful.
Good. Well, we're gonna be at the top of the hour. Are you gonna jump off at the top of the hour? Or are you gonna stick around for an extra half hour? It's up to you.
I'll stick around.
Okay. So I'm gonna I will just we'll do our closing for whomever wants to go. But before, I just want to say thank you, Richard, for showing up, because I was thinking this wasn't going to be much of a session, because I didn't have a new map to show. We didn't have new people showing up, and but you made it interesting and valuable for me. So I appreciate your showing up.
Good.
And I appreciate your stepping in, even though we all are pretty familiar with each other and you're not. But so that was maybe a slightly big ask of me, and I really appreciate your stepping into that.
It's great. It's great. So
Good. So let's do our goodbye ritual for those who need to leave. Is anybody leaving, or is everybody okay? So, and it was just Richard, if you're not familiar, we all unmute. I count down 3, 2, 1, and then we give each other our blessings for the day. And then whoever needs to jump off does so, and then the rest of us stick around and chat some more. And so let's just do that. 3, 2, 1. Thank you all.
Thank you.
For
Have a
showing up.
great
so much,
day.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a wonderful
Richard.
week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.